May 8th, 1945. 24 Japanese women knelt in Texas dust, praying for death before dawn. Their American captors had other plans. Plans involving bacon scrambled eggs and the most dangerous weapon in the United States military arsenal. Kindness. The sun rose blood red over the barbed wire fence of Camp Hearn, casting long shadows across the compound, like prison bars stretching toward eternity. The air already carried heat despite the early hour, that particular Texas heat that sits heavy on the lungs and makes breathing feel like work. Mesquite trees dotted the landscape beyond the wire, their twisted branches reaching toward a sky that looked the same here as it did in Japan, though these women would not have believed that anymore. They had been taught that even the sky over America was different, hostile, wrong. Keiko Nakamura knelt at the front of the formation, 25 years old, her uniform torn and stained with 3 weeks of accumulated dirt and fear and the physical residue of a journey she had never imagined taking. Her voice cracked with dehydration as she led the morning prayer, reciting words she had memorized in basic training. Words about honor, words about duty, words about the mercy of a swift death over the dishonor of capture. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. 48 hours without water does that to a body. 48 hours wondering which moment would be your last does something else entirely. Around her, 23 other women knelt in the dust, their heads bowed, their hands clasped, their bodies skeletal frames wrapped in the tattered remnants of Imperial Japanese military uniforms that had once been pressed and proper and filled with the certainty of purpose. They had been nurses, clerks, communications officers. They had been proud soldiers of the emperor. Now they were something their propaganda had told them was worse than death itself: American prisoners of war. 3 weeks ago, they had been captured in the Philippines. Keiko still remembered the moment with a clarity that made her stomach turn. The sound of American artillery growing closer. The chaos as their commanding officers fled, leaving them behind like abandoned equipment. The terror as American soldiers surrounded their position. She had closed her eyes, waiting for the bullet, waiting for the pain, waiting for the end that every Japanese soldier knew was coming if you let yourself be taken alive. The bullet never came. Instead, rough but not cruel hands had searched her for weapons, bound her wrists with rope that smelled like oil and canvas, and loaded her onto a transport truck with the other women. The journey to Texas had been a blur of fear and confusion and trying to understand why they were still breathing. They had been processed through Manila, fingerprinted and photographed like criminals. Then came the ship across the Pacific, where they had huddled in the hold, whispering prayers and sharing their last rice rations, certain that drowning in the dark would be their fate. Finally, the train ride across America, through California, through New Mexico, into the heart of Texas. Keiko had expected execution at every stop. The propaganda had been clear. Americans were monsters. They tortured prisoners. They violated women. They desecrated bodies. Every Japanese soldier knew the stories. Every soldier had been trained to save the last bullet for themselves. Better to die by your own hand than suffer what the Americans would do to you. But still, no bullet came. Instead, they had arrived at Camp Hearn 3 days ago. The guards had separated them from the male prisoners, German and Italian men, who stared at them with curiosity, but no violence. They had been marched to this compound, a section of the camp surrounded by its own fence within a fence. And then, incredibly impossibly, their American guards had simply left. Left them with no food, no water, no explanation. For 48 hours, they had waited, watching the sun rise and set, twice watching American soldiers patrol the perimeter, but never enter their compound. They had listened to the sounds of the camp beyond their fence. Men laughing, music playing, the smell of cooking food that made their stomachs twist with a hunger so intense it felt like hands wringing out their insides. And they had prayed for death because surely this was it. The Americans were letting them starve. Or perhaps they were waiting for them to weaken, waiting for the right moment to begin the torture their propaganda had promised. Keiko opened her eyes and looked at the women around her. Akari Sato, 28 years old, a trained nurse from Tokyo, her medical bag still clutched to her chest, though all the supplies had been confiscated. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration, but her eyes were still sharp, still calculating. She was counting hours, Keiko knew. Counting how many hours until the dehydration killed them. Perhaps 2 days, perhaps 3 if they were unlucky. Lieutenant Hana Ishikawa, 32 years old, sat with military precision despite her weakness. She was a communications officer from Kyoto, daughter of an admiral, and even now, even here, she maintained her dignity. Her back was straight. Her uniform, though filthy, was buttoned correctly. She had tried to maintain order among them, tried to keep them disciplined. But what was the point of discipline when death was the only future? Private Yuki Tanaka, the youngest at 19, wept quietly. She was from Osaka, a clerk who had joined the military to escape an arranged marriage. She had wanted freedom. Instead, she had found war. And now she would find death in a Texas prisoner camp thousands of miles from home, and her parents would never know what happened to their daughter, who had been too stubborn to marry the merchant's son. Sergeant Reiko Yamada, 35 years old, the oldest and hardest of them all, did not weep. She knelt with her eyes closed, but Keiko could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped each other so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Reiko had been a soldier for 15 years. She had seen combat. She had killed enemies. She did not fear death. But Keiko suspected she feared what would come before death. The propaganda had been very specific about what Americans did to capture Japanese women. Keiko closed her eyes again and continued the prayer. Let it be today. Let it be swift. Let it be final. Death was no longer an enemy. Death was a friend they welcomed with open arms and dry throats and bodies that had forgotten what it meant to feel anything but fear. Then in the distance, a sound, a low rumble. Engines. Keiko's eyes snapped open. Around her, the other women stirred their prayers, interrupted by the mechanical growl that was growing louder with each second. Multiple engines, large vehicles. American military trucks approaching from somewhere beyond their line of sight. This was it. The end had come. Akari reached for Keiko's hand and squeezed it. Her palm was dry and hot with fever. The dysentery was spreading among them. 3 of the women were already too weak to stand. In another day, maybe 2, they would start dying from the illness and dehydration, even if the Americans did nothing. But the Americans were coming now. The trucks were getting closer. Keiko could hear them clearly. 2, maybe 3 vehicles, heavy transport trucks by the sound of them. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking beneath her, like a newborn calf trying to find its footing. Around her, the other women struggled to their feet. Lieutenant Hannah barked a command, her voice hoarse but firm. They formed a line, ragged and weakened, but still disciplined. If they were going to die, they would die as soldiers. They would not die on their knees. The trucks appeared at the gate of their compound. Dust billowed around them as they came to a stop, the engines cutting off one by one. For a moment, there was only silence and the whistle of wind through the barbed wire. Then the truck doors opened. American soldiers emerged. Keiko counted quickly. 15 men. No 20. They were young, most of them fresh-faced despite the dust and heat. They wore their uniforms casually, sleeves rolled up against the Texas sun. Some carried rifles, but the weapons were slung over their shoulders, not aimed. One man walked to the front, an officer by his bearing and the insignia on his uniform. He was older than the others, perhaps late 30s, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that were neither cruel nor kind, just tired. So very tired. He surveyed the line of Japanese women with an expression Keiko could not read. He spoke to someone behind him, and another soldier stepped forward. This one was different, Asian features. Japanese-American, Keiko realized with a shock that ran through her like electricity. A translator. The officer spoke in English, and the translator converted his words to Japanese. I am Captain David Brennan. I need to know your condition. Are you injured? Do you have access to food and water? Do any of you need immediate medical attention? Keiko stared. This did not match the propaganda. This was not the beginning of torture. This was what was this? The women remained silent, paralyzed between terror and confusion. The question hung in the air like smoke. Captain Brennan waited, his expression patient but concerned. Akari, drawing on some deep reserve of courage that Keiko would never understand, stepped forward. She spoke in broken English words she had learned in medical school before the war had made such knowledge dangerous. No food? 2 days? Water gone. 3 women very sick. Need medicine. Brennan's jaw tightened. Not with anger, Keiko realized, but with something else. Professional dismay. The look of a man who had just discovered a serious mistake had been made. He turned to his men and barked orders. The soldiers scattered. Some ran back to the trucks. Others began setting up what looked like a medical tent at the edge of the compound. Brennan spoke again and the translator conveyed his words. You will receive food, water, and medical care immediately. This is not negotiable. This is protocol under the Geneva Convention. You are prisoners of war under United States military authority. That means you are entitled to the same basic care as our own soldiers. Keiko's mind reeled. The same care as American soldiers. This made no sense. The propaganda had been clear. Americans were savages. They violated all rules of war. They showed no mercy. But here was an American officer talking about protocol, about the Geneva Convention, about care. Brennan was still speaking. The translator continued. I understand you have been without food and water for 2 days. I apologize for that oversight. It will not happen again. My men are preparing a meal for you now. You will eat. You will drink. You will receive medical attention. And then we will discuss your situation. He paused and his tired eyes swept across them once more. You are no longer in danger. You are under the protection of the United States Army. Protection. The word echoed in Keiko's mind like a bell struck in an empty room. Protection from whom? From what? They were the enemy. Why would Americans protect them? Brennan turned and walked toward one of the trucks. The soldiers were unloading crates, large wooden crates, stamped with English words Keiko could not read. And then the smell hit her. Faint but unmistakable. Food. Real food. Not rice gruel, not watery soup, not the starvation rations they had received in the Philippines. Real food. Her stomach, which had been a tight knot of fear, suddenly unclenched and cramped with a hunger so intense it was painful. Around her she heard quiet gasps as the other women caught the scent too. One soldier, younger than the others, pulled back the canvas covering on one of the trucks. Inside were more supplies. Blankets, medical equipment, containers of water. So much water. Keiko felt tears prick at her eyes. She did not understand. She did not understand any of this. Lieutenant Hana spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Is this real? And no one answered because no one knew. What these women had no idea about, what they could not possibly have understood in that moment of confusion and hope and terror, was that Camp Hearn's commander had a very different protocol in mind. One that would violate everything they had been taught about their enemy. And it all started with a simple question from a young soldier who had never left his home state until the war. A soldier whose hands were shaking in a kitchen 3 miles away as he laid strips of bacon in a cast iron skillet. A soldier whose brother had died on a beach in the Pacific 2 months ago. A soldier who was about to serve breakfast to the people he believed had killed the person he loved most in the world. But the women did not know this yet. They only knew that the smell of food was getting stronger. That American soldiers were setting up tents and carrying equipment and moving with purpose and efficiency. That Captain Brennan had said they would eat. Keiko looked at Akari. Akari looked back. In her friend's eyes, she saw the same question that burned in her own mind. Why? Why this kindness? Why this care? What did the Americans want from them? The answer, when it came in the form of a young Mexican-American private carrying a tray of food, would break something fundamental in Keiko's understanding of the world. It would crack open the wall of certainty that war had built around her mind. And it would begin a transformation that would echo forward through time in ways none of them, not the prisoners, not the guards, not Captain Brennan, with his tired eyes and his dead daughter's photograph in his breast pocket, could possibly imagine. But first, in a kitchen on the other side of Camp Hearn, a young man named Tom Garcia was crying over bacon. And the story of why he was crying, why his hands shook as he cracked eggs into a bowl, why he wanted to refuse the order he had been given, but could not, that story would matter just as much as the one unfolding in the compound, where 24 women waited to see if the Americans would keep their promise. If you or your family members served during World War II, especially if you encountered prisoners of war in Texas, share your story in the comments below. This history matters, and your memories help keep it alive. Now let me take you back to that morning in May 1945, to the moment when breakfast became something more than food, when kindness became a weapon more powerful than any bomb, when the war between nations became a war for human souls. Private Tom Garcia stood in the Camp Hearn kitchen, 21 years old, his hands trembling as he unwrapped thick-cut bacon from butcher paper. The bacon was Texas-style maple smoked, the kind his family used at their restaurant back in Fort Worth. The kind his brother, Miguel, had loved. The kind Miguel used to steal from the kitchen when he thought their mother wasn't looking, burning his fingers on the hot meat laughing when Mama swatted at him with a dish towel. Miguel was dead now, 2 months dead. Iwo Jima, a Japanese machine gun nest, volcanic black sand and blood, and Miguel calling for their mother in Spanish, calling for her until his voice stopped, and there was only the sound of the Pacific Ocean washing over a beach that would be remembered as one of the bloodiest battles in American history. The telegram had arrived on a Tuesday. Tom had been working at the restaurant prepping for the lunch rush. His mother had opened it at the register. The sound she made a wail of pure animal grief still echoed in Tom's nightmares. His father had closed the restaurant for a week. They had held a memorial service. Half of Fort Worth had come. Miguel had been popular, beloved. Everyone had a Miguel story. Everyone had been touched by his warmth, his easy laugh, his ability to make anyone feel like family. And then Tom had tried to enlist for combat duty, had tried to volunteer for the Pacific Theater, had tried to get himself sent to Japan to kill the people who had killed his brother, to make them pay to balance the scales in the only way that made sense to his grief-addled mind. His commanding officer had denied the request, had seen the rage in Tom's eyes and known it would get him killed within a week. Instead, Tom had been assigned to Camp Hearn, kitchen duty, cooking for prisoners of war. Usually German prisoners, occasionally Italian. Men who seemed almost relieved to be captured away from the war, safe-fed. Some of them even worked on local Texas farms during the day, helping with the labor shortage, becoming part of the community in a strange way that Tom had never quite understood but had accepted as just how things worked in this odd corner of the war. Men who had not killed Miguel, but now Japanese prisoners. Women, yes, but still Japanese. Still the enemy. Still the people responsible for the telegram that had broken his mother's heart, for the empty chair at the dinner table, for the way his father's hands shook when he tried to smoke meat, the way Miguel used to help him, for the way the restaurant felt haunted by laughter that would never sound again. Captain Brennan's order had been clear. Prepare a full American breakfast. 24 servings, 30 minutes. Tom looked at the bacon, at the strips of meat that represented everything his family was. Everything Fort Worth meant, everything America meant. Comfort, abundance, home. He laid the first strip in the cast iron skillet. The smell rose immediately, filling the kitchen, salt and smoke and fat rendering into liquid gold. His stomach growled despite the churning anger. The bacon began to sizzle, pop and crackle and hiss. Tom flipped the strips methodically, achieving the perfect golden brown color, the crispy edges, exactly how his father had taught him, exactly how Miguel used to make it before he went away and never came back. Miguel used to steal bacon from this very kitchen when they were kids, and Tom would visit him on base, would sneak a strip when he thought no one was looking, would burn his fingers on the hot meat, would laugh that infectious laugh that made everyone around him smile. Everyone had loved Miguel's laugh. Tom cracked eggs into a bowl, 24 of them, added milk and butter and black pepper, whisked them together with more force than necessary, watching the eggs froth and foam, trying not to think about what he was doing, trying not to think about who he was cooking for. The eggs went into another skillet. Scrambled eggs, simple, basic. The kind of meal you made when you wanted comfort, when you wanted home, when you wanted to show someone they mattered. Why was he making comfort food for people who had killed his brother? The bread went into the oven. Texas toast, thick slices buttered on both sides. They would come out golden and crispy and perfect. The coffee brewed strong and dark American style, the way soldiers liked it. Bitter enough to wake you up, hot enough to remind you that you were alive. Tom moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, his body knowing what to do even as his mind rebelled. Flip the bacon, stir the eggs, check the bread, pour the coffee. He had done this 1,000 times before, but never for them, never for the enemy, never for the people who had taken Miguel away. He plated the food, white ceramic plates, standard military issue. Bacon arranged just so, eggs fluffy and golden, toast perfectly browned, a glass of cold milk beside each plate, exactly what an American soldier would receive in the mess hall, exactly what Miguel should have received in the Pacific, but probably never did. When Tom finished, 24 plates sat on the counter. Steam rose from the scrambled eggs. The bacon glistened with fat. The toast was perfectly browned. The milk was cold despite the Texas heat starting to build outside. It looked good. It smelled good. It was the kind of meal that said welcome, that said you matter, that said someone cares about you. Tom stared at the plates and felt tears burn in his eyes. Miguel had written in his last letter, "Tell Mama I want migas when I get home." Her breakfast tacos with the scrambled eggs and tortilla strips and salsa. Tell her I dream about them. Tell her I can taste them when I close my eyes and try to remember what home feels like. He never got home. He never got Mama's cooking again. He died in volcanic sand calling for a mother who would never hear him killed by people who looked like the prisoners Tom was about to feed. Captain Brennan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his presence filling the space like a shadow. "Time to serve it, Private." Tom looked at the plates, looked at his captain, looked at his own shaking hands. The question came out before he could stop it. "Sir, I have to ask, why are we doing this?" Brennan was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped into the kitchen and looked at the food Tom had prepared. Really looked at it, taking in the care evident in every plate, the precision of the arrangement, the love that had gone into the cooking despite everything. "Because it is the right thing to do, Private. Because we are Americans. Because the Geneva Convention requires it. Because if we treat prisoners with cruelty, we are no better than the enemy. Because your mother taught you that food is love. And sometimes love is the hardest thing to give." Tom felt something crack in his chest. "Sir, they killed my brother." Brennan's eyes met his. There was understanding there and pain that ran deeper than Tom had realized. "I know," the captain said. "They killed my daughter. Pearl Harbor. She was 7 years old." The kitchen fell silent except for the distant sounds of the camp going about its morning routine. Tom stared at Captain Brennan, trying to process what he had just heard. A daughter, 7 years old. Pearl Harbor. Brennan pulled a small oval locket from his breast pocket, opened it with fingers that trembled just slightly, and held it out so Tom could see. Inside was a photograph of a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile wearing a white dress, holding a stuffed rabbit, looking at the camera with eyes full of joy and innocence, and a future that would never come. "Her name was Emma Brennan," said his voice rough. "Sarah Emma Brennan. She was at the Naval Hospital that morning with her mother. They were bringing cookies to the wounded sailors. When the bombs fell, there was chaos. Shrapnel from a secondary explosion tore through the hospital wing. Emma died instantly. She was treating wounded men when it happened. Some of them were Japanese pilots who had been shot down. The nurses said Emma didn't discriminate. She wanted to help everyone who was bleeding. She was 7 years old and she understood something I am only learning now." Brennan looked at the photograph for a long moment, then closed the locket and returned it to his pocket right over his heart where he could feel its weight with every breath. "The enemy is only enemy until you see their humanity," he said. "These women came here expecting monsters. We have to prove them wrong, not for them, Private, for us, for Emma, for Miguel, for every American who died believing in something better than hatred, something higher than revenge." Tom's throat was tight. He could not speak, could only stand there holding a spatula surrounded by plates of food he had made with his mother's love and his own hands and his brother's memory. Brennan continued, his voice stronger now. "I am not asking you to forgive them. I am asking you to do your duty, to uphold American values even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because that is what separates us from them. Not our weapons, not our strength, our values. The belief that every human being has dignity, that even enemies deserve basic decency, that we can be better than our worst impulses." Tom swallowed hard. "Does it get easier, sir?" Brennan picked up one of the plates, looked at the food, looked at Tom with eyes that had seen too much death and not enough of whatever would make the death mean something. "I will let you know when I find out." Together, they carried the trays toward the compound where 24 Japanese women waited starving and terrified for whatever came next. Tom's hands still shook. His heart still ached, and with a grief so deep it felt like drowning. But he carried the food anyway. He carried it because Captain Brennan had ordered him to. He carried it because the Geneva Convention required it. He carried it because his mother had raised him to believe that feeding people was sacred, that making someone less hungry was a form of prayer, that kindness was stronger than hate, even when hate felt like the only honest emotion left. But mostly, though he would not admit it to himself yet, he carried it because some part of him, the part his mother had shaped with her love and her cooking and her faith, knew that Miguel would have wanted him to. Miguel, who had written about enemy soldiers being just men far from home. Miguel, who had understood, even in the chaos of combat, that the tragedy was not just that people died, but that the people dying could have been friends in another life. The bacon cooled slightly on the plates. The eggs stayed warm. The toast remained perfect. And as Tom walked across the Texas dust toward women who had been praying for death, he thought about his mother's words, the ones she had repeated every morning when they opened the restaurant. Feed everyone who comes to your table, mijo. Feed them well. Feed them with love. Food is love made visible. He had fed them, and now he would have to watch them eat, would have to see their faces when they tasted bacon for the first time, would have to witness their humanity up close, would have to face the possibility that the enemy was not a faceless monster, but a collection of individual human beings who were scared and hungry and far from home, just like Miguel had been, just like every American soldier was, just like everyone caught in the machinery of war, ground up by decisions made by old men in distant capitals, dying for causes they barely understood, killing people they had never met. Tom reached the compound fence. The women stood in a line, 24 skeletal figures in tattered uniforms, watching him approach with eyes that held everything: fear, hope, confusion, hunger. The desperate need to live, warring with the certainty that they should not want to live. That capture was dishonor, that survival was shame. He set the first tray down in front of the woman who seemed to be their leader. She was young, maybe his age, with dark eyes that were too knowing, too full of pain for someone so young. She looked at the plate, at the bacon, at the eggs, at the milk, at him. Their eyes met, hers asking a question his could not answer. Why are you showing us kindness? What do you want from us? Is this real? Or is this the cruelest torture of all, to give us hope before you take it away? Tom said nothing. He had no words. He only had food and faith that somehow this was the right thing to do, even though every fiber of his being wanted to refuse, wanted to let them starve, wanted to make them pay for Miguel's death. But that was not who America was supposed to be. That was not who his mother had raised him to be. That was not who Miguel had died believing his little brother would become. So Tom served breakfast to the enemy, and in doing so, he took the first step toward becoming the man his brother had always believed he could be. The first step toward understanding that the war that really mattered was not the war between nations, but the war inside every human heart, the battle between hatred and compassion, between revenge and mercy, between the easy path of destruction and the hard path of building something better. The bacon was still warm, the eggs were perfect, the toast was golden, and 24 Japanese women who had been praying for death were about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can give your enemy is not a bullet, but a breakfast. Keiko Nakamura watched Sergeant Reiko take the first bite of bacon, and the world shifted beneath her feet. The hardest woman among them, the soldier who had killed enemy fighters in close combat, the veteran who had survived 15 years of military service without flinching, stood in the Texas dust, with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She chewed slowly, as if the act of tasting required her full concentration, as if she was trying to understand something that did not fit into any category her mind had prepared. She swallowed, closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she looked at Keiko with an expression that held 1,000 questions and not a single answer. The spell broke. All 24 women reached for their food. They ate slowly at first, carefully, their starved bodies, remembering what it meant to be nourished. Then faster. Then with desperate hunger that had been suppressed by fear for 48 hours, suddenly unleashed by the reality of salt and smoke and fat melting on tongues that had forgotten what flavor meant. Keiko bit into the bacon. The sensation was overwhelming. She had eaten military rations for 3 years. Rice when there was rice. Dried fish when there was fish. Sometimes nothing. This was different. This was abundance made edible. This was impossible. Americans did not feed enemies like this. Americans tortured prisoners. Americans were monsters. The propaganda had been clear. Crystal clear. Repeated until it became truth, until it became the foundation of everything they believed about this war, about their enemy, about what capture meant. But here was the proof, hot and crispy and undeniably real in her mouth. She looked up. The young Mexican-American soldier who had brought the food stood at the edge of the compound watching them. His expression was anguished. Every muscle in his body was tense, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He did not want to be here. That much was obvious. Did not want to feed them, was doing it anyway. Yuki, the youngest, chewing carefully on toast, managed 2 words in halting English. "Thank you." The soldier flinched as if struck. Then he turned and walked away quickly, his shoulders rigid with tension, moving like a man trying to outrun something he could never escape. Captain Brennan remained. He watched them eat with that same tired, unreadable expression. When Lieutenant Hanna looked up at him, he spoke through the translator. "There is more if you need it. Drink all the water you can. Captain Hayes will examine anyone who is ill. Tomorrow we will discuss your situation in more detail. Today you eat and rest." He turned to leave, then paused at the gate. "Welcome to Texas, ladies. You are safe here." And then he was gone, leaving 24 Japanese women sitting in the dust, holding plates of American food, crying as they ate, trying to understand what had just happened and what it meant and whether any of their training had prepared them for this. Keiko looked at the bacon in her hand, at the milk she had not tasted in years, at the American flag flying over the camp in the distance. Safe, the captain had said. She did not know if she could believe that, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Everything she had been taught about Americans was wrong, and if that was wrong, what else had been a lie? The question terrified her almost as much as the execution she had expected. Because if the propaganda was false, if the enemy was not who she thought, then who was she? What had she been fighting for? What did any of it mean? Keiko ate her breakfast and tasted something more complex than bacon and eggs. She tasted the beginning of doubt, the first crack in the wall of certainty that war had built around her mind. Day 2 began with another breakfast. The same bacon, the same eggs, the same toast. Private Garcia prepared the meal with the same conflicted efficiency, his hands no longer shaking quite as much, though his jaw remained tight with unspoken grief. But after breakfast, something new happened. Captain William Hayes, the camp's chief medical officer, set up a proper medical tent. He was 32 years old, a graduate of Baylor Medical School in Dallas, and he had seen more trauma in 3 years of war than most doctors saw in a lifetime. He had patched soldiers on battlefields, performed surgery in mud-filled trenches, held dying men as they called for mothers who would never hear them. He was good at his job, professional, detached when necessary. But when he walked into the medical tent that morning and found Okari Sato waiting for him, something in his professional detachment cracked. She stood beside the examination table where one of the sick women lay, her medical bag open. Inside, Hayes could see surgical tools, basic instruments, but well-maintained, organized with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to use them. Akari spoke in careful, accented English. "This woman has severe dehydration and dysentery. She needs intravenous fluids, saline solution, also antibiotics if you have them. Sulfanilamide would be best." Hayes stared at her. Then he looked at the sick woman. Akari had already begun a preliminary examination, checked pulse, examined eyes and mouth, palpated the abdomen with practiced hands that knew what they were looking for. "You are a doctor," Hayes said. It was not a question. "Nurse, trained surgeon, Imperial Naval Hospital, Tokyo, 2 years trauma unit." Hayes felt his assumptions shifting like tectonic plates beneath his feet. This was not just a prisoner. This was a colleague. Someone who had stood where he had stood, done what he had done, seen what he had seen. Someone who had taken the same oath to heal regardless of who was bleeding. He moved to the supply cabinet and pulled out an IV kit. "I need to insert a line. Can you assist?" Akari nodded. She moved with the efficiency of medical training, years of practice distilled into smooth, economical movements. She cleaned the injection site, found the vein on her first attempt, secured the needle with tape while Hayes connected the saline bag. They worked in silence for several minutes. The sick woman's breathing eased as the fluids began to flow. Hayes checked her vital signs and made notes on a chart. "You are very skilled," he said finally. Akari looked at her hands. "You learn quickly in war or people die." Hayes understood that. He had learned the same way. Trial by fire, mistakes that haunted you, successes you barely had time to celebrate before the next emergency arrived. "Why did you become a doctor?" he asked. Akari considered the question. To save lives, you same reason. The words hung between them. Simple, true, stripped of everything else. Politics, nationality, propaganda. None of it mattered when someone was dying and you had the training to help them. None of it mattered in the moment when you placed your hands on another human being and tried to pull them back from the edge of death. Hayes looked at her, really looked at her, not as an enemy, not as a prisoner, as a fellow physician who had chosen healing in a world committed to destruction. I have 2 more patients who need examination, he said. Will you help me? Akari met his eyes. There was a question in her gaze. Permission, uncertainty, fear that this offer might be a trick, that kindness might be the prelude to cruelty. Hayes held out a stethoscope, colleague to colleague. Akari took the stethoscope. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, from something else. Recognition, perhaps, or relief. The acknowledgement that her skills, her training, her purpose still mattered, even here, even now, even as a prisoner. They spent the next 3 hours working together, examining patients, discussing treatment plans. Hayes taught her about plasma transfusions, a technique the Americans had refined. Akari showed him a Japanese herbal compress for nausea that actually worked better than the standard American antiemetics. At one point, Hayes found himself laughing, actually laughing. Akari had just described a particularly stubborn admiral who had refused surgery until she threatened to report him to his wife. They are all the same, Hayes said. Admirals, generals, politicians, terrible patients. Akari smiled. It was the first time Hayes had seen her smile. It transformed her face, made her look younger, made her look like someone who existed outside of war, outside of this barbed wire compound, outside of the categories that divided human beings into us and them. Guess that makes us colleagues, not enemies, Hayes said. Akari's smile faded. Her eyes grew serious. I want to believe that, but I do not know if the world will let us. Hayes had no answer to that because she was right. The world was not kind to people who saw humanity in enemies. The world built walls and drew lines and demanded that you choose a side and hate everyone on the other side with a purity of conviction that left no room for complexity or compassion or the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the enemy was also human. But in this tent for these hours, they were not enemies. They were 2 doctors trying to heal the sick, and that was enough. While Akari learned American medical techniques, Keiko Nakamura was learning something else entirely. English. Or rather, she was learning English while Private Tom Garcia prepared lunch, moving around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had grown up in restaurant work, someone for whom cooking was as natural as breathing. He had been assigned to teach basic English to the prisoners, part of the processing protocol. Most of the American soldiers had refused. Teaching the enemy felt like betrayal. But Captain Brennan had looked at Tom with those tired, knowing eyes and said, "You are on kitchen duty anyway, Private. Might as well teach while you cook." So here they were, Tom at the stove, Keiko sitting on a stool nearby, watching and listening and trying to form English words around a Japanese tongue. Today, Tom was preparing something special. Texas barbecue, the kind his father made at the family restaurant. Brisket that had been smoking since before dawn. 12 hours over mesquite wood, the bark black and beautiful. The meat so tender it fell apart at the touch. "This is brisket," Tom said, gesturing to the meat. "Say it, brisket." Keiko tried. The word felt strange in her mouth. Tom almost smiled. Close enough. He pulled the brisket from the smoker. The smell filled the kitchen. Smoke and fat and slow-cooked perfection. Keiko's stomach growled audibly. Tom heard it, and his expression flickered. Something between sympathy and that ever-present anger he carried like a second skin. He began slicing. Each cut revealed the pink smoke ring beneath the bark. The juice ran onto the cutting board. Tom worked with practiced precision. Thin slices against the grain, the way his father had taught him, the way generations of Texas pitmasters had perfected over decades of trial and error. In Hokkaido, we have Genghis Khan, Keiko offered in halting English. "Lamb barbecue, very good." Tom paused. His knife stopped moving. "Lamb. We got lamb too in Texas. Texas has everything." Keiko asked carefully, watching his face for signs that she was overstepping. "Your home. Is it beautiful?" The question hung in the air. Tom's knife remained still. He stared at the brisket for a long moment, and Keiko wondered if she had made a mistake, if she had touched something too raw, too painful. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion barely contained. Yeah, Fort Worth, stockyards, cattle, barbecue joints on every corner. My family's restaurant, best barbacoa in North Texas. People line up every weekend for my dad's brisket. My mama makes the sides, pinto beans, coleslaw, cornbread that melts in your mouth. Keiko heard something in his voice, the same thing she heard in her own voice when she talked about Hokkaido. Homesickness, the ache of distance, the longing for familiar things and familiar people, and a life that made sense. You miss home, she said quietly. Tom looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment all the anger seemed to drain away, replaced by simple exhaustion. Every damn day. Me too, Keiko said. The admission settled between them like a fragile bridge. Two people who wanted to be anywhere but here, who wanted to be home with family and familiar things in lives that had not been shattered by war. They were enemies, yes. But in this moment, in this kitchen, filled with the smell of Texas barbecue, they were also just two young people far from home, missing everything they had lost. Tom returned to slicing. Keiko watched his hands move with the same precision a car used in surgery, the same care her father used when planting rice. Universal human precision, the desire to do something well. Tom prepared the full spread, brisket, ribs with dry rub, the meat falling off the bone. Pinto beans cooked ranch style with bacon and molasses. Coleslaw vinegar based and tangy. Cornbread sweet and golden butter melting into it. And sweet tea, very sweet Southern style. He explained each dish as he worked. Keiko practiced the English words, tried to understand the flavors just from description. Tom found himself talking more than necessary about his father's restaurant, his mother's sides, the way Fort Worth smelled on Saturday mornings when every barbecue place fired up their smokers, the community that gathered around food, around smoke and meat, and the simple act of eating together. Your brother, Keiko said carefully. She had heard the soldiers talking, had pieced together enough English to understand. He liked this food. Tom's hands froze. His whole body went rigid. For a long moment, he said nothing. The kitchen was silent except for the distant sounds of the camp. Then quietly the words came. Miguel loved it. Used to say he dreamed about it in the Pacific. Said when he came home he wanted Mama's breakfast tacos. Migas with the scrambled eggs and tortilla strips and salsa. His voice cracked. He never got to come home. Keiko felt tears burn in her eyes. I am sorry. War is a terrible thing. Tom looked at her. His eyes were red. His jaw was clenched. She could see the battle happening behind his face. The anger, the grief, the desperate need to blame someone, anyone for the hole Miguel's death had left in the world. But when he spoke, his voice was softer. Yeah, it is. He plated the food, put a generous serving in front of Keiko. The brisket steamed, the beans bubbled. The cornbread was perfect. Eat, he said. Tell me if Texas barbecue is better than your Genghis Khan. Keiko picked up a piece of brisket, bit into it. The flavors exploded. Smoke, salt, the sweetness of fat, the tang of the rub. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, Tom was watching her with something like hope. Is very good, she said, but Genghis Khan also very good. Maybe they are same. Different, but same. Tom understood what she meant. Different countries, different flavors, but the same human need for comfort food, for home, for love made edible. Maybe, he said. And in that kitchen over Texas barbecue, a Mexican-American soldier and a Japanese clerk found something unexpected. Not friendship, not yet, but the possibility of it. The recognition that they were both just people far from home, missing what they had lost trying to survive. It was a small thing. A tiny crack in the wall of hatred war had built. But it was something. That evening, as the sun set over Camp Hearn, Keiko sat outside the barracks looking at the Texas stars. They looked the same as the stars over Hokkaido. The same patterns, the same light traveling across the same vast darkness. This realization hit her with unexpected force. The stars did not care about empires or propaganda or which country you were born in. They shone for everyone equally. She had been taught to pray to the emperor, to die for honor, to believe that capture was the ultimate shame. But the Americans had shown mercy, had fed her, had treated her illness, had spoken to her like a human being rather than an enemy to be destroyed. This contradicted everything. If the emperor's teaching was wrong about Americans, what else was wrong? The question terrified her. If the foundation was false, what did that mean about the structure built on top of it, her service, her sacrifice, her willingness to die for a cause she had never questioned? All of it suddenly felt unstable, like standing on ground that was shifting beneath her feet. She found Tom in the kitchen later that night, cleaning up after dinner preparation. He looked up when she entered, surprised but not unwelcoming. "You are Christian?" "Yes," Keiko asked quietly. Tom paused, dish towel in hand. "Yeah." Why Keiko struggled with the words, with the question that had been burning in her mind all day. "Your God teaches forgiveness." Tom leaned against the counter. "That's what my mama says. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. It's right there in the Bible." Keiko absorbed this. Japanese teaching says die with honor. American teaching says live with mercy. Which is true. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would stay with Keiko for the rest of her life. "I don't know if either is completely true, but I know my mama's right about one thing. Feeding people is holy. Making someone less hungry is prayer. Not the words you say, the actions you take." Keiko felt something shift in her chest. So breakfast was prayer. Tom looked at her with eyes that were no longer quite as full of anger. Maybe. Yeah, maybe it was. Keiko returned to the barracks with this new understanding, this crack in the certainty that had defined her entire adult life. She lay on her cot, listening to the other women breathe, and wondered what it meant to rebuild yourself when the foundation had crumbled. Wondered if it was possible to create something new from the ruins of what you used to believe. Not everyone at Camp Hearn was experiencing transformation. Sergeant Frank Coleman stood in the shadows beyond the mess hall, watching the Japanese women eat lunch, watching them smile, watching them talk with American soldiers as if this were normal, as if they had not killed thousands of American boys. His hands clenched into fists. His jaw ached from grinding his teeth. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. Coleman was 38 years old from Alabama. He had been a good soldier once, a leader. His men had trusted him, followed him, died for him. 43 of them, every single one. Guadalcanal. The jungle had been hell. Hot, wet, full of mosquitoes and disease, and an enemy that fought with fanatical determination. His platoon had been ambushed. Japanese soldiers had poured out of the jungle, screaming, firing, throwing grenades. The battle had been chaos. Noise, blood, death. Coleman had survived by luck. By being in the wrong place at the right time, or maybe the right place at the wrong time. He could never decide which. His best friend Danny had taken a bullet to the throat, died in Coleman's arms, drowning in his own blood, calling for his mother in that thick Birmingham accent. 19 years old, wanted to be a teacher, had a girl back home who was waiting for him. Every man in that platoon had screamed as they died, called for mothers, called for God, called for mercy that never came. The Army had sent Coleman stateside, medical discharge for psychological trauma, but he had fought it, demanded to stay in service. They had compromised. Stateside duty, Camp Hearn, guarding prisoners who could not fight back. It should have been easy, Germans and Italians mostly. They were practically happy to be captured, away from the war, safe, fed. Some of them even worked on local Texas farms during the day, helping with the labor shortage, becoming part of the community in ways that Coleman found disturbing, but had learned to accept. But Japanese prisoners, women soldiers eating American food, learning English, being treated like guests instead of enemies. This was betrayal. This was dishonor to every American boy who had died fighting them. Coleman had tried to voice his concerns to Captain Brennan, had been shut down, told that orders were orders, that the Geneva Convention did not have exceptions for personal feelings, that America was better than the enemy precisely because America followed the rules even when it was difficult. But Coleman knew something Brennan did not seem to understand. Rules did not bring back the dead. Rules did not stop the nightmares. Rules did not make Danny's death mean anything more than random chance and bad luck and the cruelty of a universe that let good men die screaming while people like Coleman survived for no reason at all. So Coleman had decided to take matters into his own hands. Someone had to remind these prisoners that they were enemies, not guests. Someone had to show them that this was not a vacation. This was war. And in war, you did not make friends with people who had killed your brothers. If you or your family members face difficult choices about forgiveness and justice during wartime, your generation's wisdom matters. Share your thoughts in the comments. How do we honor the fallen while still maintaining our values? These questions are never simple. It was midnight when Coleman slipped into the kitchen. The camp was quiet. Guards were on patrol, but Coleman knew their patterns knew where the blind spots were. The kitchen was dark. He used a small flashlight, keeping the beam low. He found the milk storage first. The milk was delivered fresh every morning from a local dairy, kept cold in the icebox enough for all the prisoners and the American personnel. Coleman pulled out the bottles, opened them, poured out half the contents. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bottle of laxative. Medical grade, strong. He had taken it from the dispensary earlier. He poured the laxative into the milk, resealed the bottles, put them back in the icebox. It would not kill them, just make them sick. Just remind them that they were prisoners, not guests, that they did not deserve American generosity. Next, the water barrel, the large barrel that supplied drinking water to the prisoner compound. Coleman opened the valve and let some water drain out. Then he added more laxative, enough to affect anyone who drank it. He was closing the valve when he heard a sound behind him, a lighter clicking, striking, the small flame illuminating a face. Private Tom Garcia stood in the doorway. He had been smoking outside, watching the stars, thinking about Miguel, and he had seen Coleman enter the kitchen. Tom's eyes went to the water barrel, to Coleman's hands, to the small medical bottle Coleman was trying to hide. The two men stared at each other. The silence stretched like wire pulled tight, ready to snap. "What are you doing?" Sergeant Tom asked. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Coleman straightened. He was older, higher rank, had seniority. But in that moment, standing in the dark kitchen, with evidence of sabotage literally in his hands, he felt like a caught child. "I am doing what should have been done from the start," Coleman said. "I am reminding these prisoners that they are enemies, not friends. By poisoning their food," Tom's voice was harder now, "by making them sick. They do not deserve to be comfortable, Private. They killed our boys. They killed your brother. My entire platoon died at Guadalcanal. Every man, and now we are feeding them barbecue, teaching them English. This is wrong." Tom took a step forward. His cigarette dangled from his lips, the ember glowing red in the darkness. "You think I do not know they killed Miguel? You think I do not wake up every morning wanting revenge? But Captain Brennan gave orders. Geneva Convention requires us to treat prisoners humanely. We are Americans. We follow the law." Coleman's anger flared like gasoline ignited. The law. The law did not save my men. The law did not stop the Japanese from torturing prisoners at Bataan, from executing surrendered soldiers, from fighting to the last man on every island. They do not follow the law. Why should we? Tom's answer was simple, devastating. Because we are better than them. The words hit Coleman like a physical blow. He staggered back against the counter. Better? How does being better bring back the dead? How does it honor the men who died? Tom flicked his cigarette into the sink, stepped closer. His eyes were hard but not cruel. "My mama taught me that you honor the dead by living well, by being the kind of person they would be proud of. Miguel would not want me to poison prisoners. He would want me to be better, to prove that America stands for something, that we are not just another country that kills and hates, that we actually believe in the freedom and justice we talk about." "You do not understand," Coleman said. His voice was breaking now. "You did not see what I saw. You did not watch your entire platoon die screaming. You did not hold men while they bled out calling for mothers who would never hear them. You do not know." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke softly. "You are right. I do not know that. But I know my brother died fighting for American values, freedom, justice, honor. If we betray those values because we are angry, then Miguel died for nothing. Then Danny died for nothing. Then all of them died for nothing." Coleman felt something crack inside him. The wall he had built around his grief, the anger that had kept him functional, it all came crashing down. He slumped against the counter, His shoulders shook. He was crying and he could not stop. They died screaming for water, he said through sobs. My boys, they died screaming for water, and we are giving these people milk, cold milk, good food, comfortable beds. It is not fair. It is not right. Tom did not approach, did not touch him, just stood there bearing witness to Coleman's breakdown, to years of trauma finally breaking through the surface. No, Tom said eventually, it is not fair. War is not fair. Death is not fair. But making prisoners sick does not honor your men. It just makes us cruel. And we are better than that, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Coleman wiped his face, looked at the young private, saw something in Tom's eyes that he recognized. Grief, fresh and raw. Tom was carrying his own dead brother, his own rage, his own need for revenge. But he was choosing something else, something harder. What are you going to do? Coleman asked. Tom pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offered one to Coleman. Coleman took it with shaking hands. Tom lit both cigarettes. They smoked in silence for a moment. I am going to dump this milk, Tom said finally. Refill the water barrel, and you are going to help me. Then we are going to report to Captain Brennan in the morning. Tell him what happened. Face whatever consequences come, Court-Martial Coleman said. Probably, Tom agreed. They worked together in silence, dumped the contaminated milk, scrubbed the containers, refilled the water barrel with clean water, removed all evidence of the sabotage attempt. When they were finished, Coleman looked at Tom. Your brother would be proud of you. Tom's eyes glistened. Maybe. I hope so. They walked out of the kitchen together into the Texas night toward whatever morning would bring. Behind them, the kitchen was clean, the food was safe, and two soldiers who had wanted revenge had chosen something harder, something better. They had chosen to be American. Dawn broke over Camp Hearn, and Tom Garcia and Frank Coleman walked into Captain Brennan's office like men walking to their own execution. The office was small, a desk, two chairs, an American flag in the corner. And on the desk in a silver frame, the photograph of Emma Brennan, 7 years old, smiling at a camera with a gap-toothed grin that would never grow into an adult smile. Both men stood at attention. Tom spoke first, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. Sir, we need to report an incident. Brennan listened without interrupting. Tom told him everything. Coleman's attempt to poison the milk and water, Tom's intervention, the cleanup, the choice they had made together to do the right thing even though it meant facing consequences. When Tom finished, the silence in the office was heavy enough to crush bone. Brennan stood, walked to the window, looked out at the compound where 24 Japanese women were beginning to stir, unaware that they had nearly been poisoned, unaware that 2 American soldiers had fought a war in a kitchen at midnight, and that mercy had won by the thinnest of margins. Brennan turned back to them. His face was unreadable. Sergeant Coleman, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command, and something deeper, something personal. You violated direct orders. You attempted to harm prisoners under United States military protection. By all rights, I should have you court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. Coleman stood rigid, accepting, ready for whatever judgment came. Then Brennan looked at Tom. Private Garcia, you prevented a serious breach of Geneva Convention protocol. You also concealed evidence and delayed reporting for several hours. By rights, you should face charges as well. Brennan sat down, pulled out the locket, opened it, looked at his daughter's face for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less firm. For 4 years, I have carried rage, wanted to make every Japanese person pay for my daughter's death. But Emma would not want that. At 7 years old, she understood something I am still learning. The enemy is only enemy until you see their humanity. These women came here expecting monsters. We have to prove them wrong, not for them, for us, for Emma, for Miguel, for Danny, for every American who died believing in something better than hatred. He looked at both men. Sergeant Coleman, you are confined to quarters pending review. Private Garcia, you are on report for delayed notification. However, and here Brennan's voice took on an edge of steel wrapped in velvet. Both of you made a choice last night. Coleman, you were ready to betray everything we stand for because of pain. Garcia, you stopped him, not with violence, with compassion. That is the choice I am giving you both now. Brennan stood. Coleman, You will work in the kitchen with Garcia for 2 weeks. Educational duty. You will prepare meals for our prisoners. You will serve them. You will learn their names. You will see them as human beings, or you will face court-martial. Your choice. Coleman's jaw clenched. But he met Brennan's eyes and saw something there that made him nod. Yes, sir. Dismissed. As they left, Brennan called out, Garcia. Tom turned back. Your brother would be proud of you, and so would your mother. Tom's throat tightened. Thank you, sir. 3 days later, a storm rolled across the Texas Hill Country. Keiko took shelter under the eaves of a supply building as rain began to fall in sheets, turning the compound dust into mud, washing everything clean. She was not alone. 3 American soldiers had already claimed the space. Corporal Jack Miller from Amarillo, young and freckled. Private Ben Carter from Lubbock, older, steadier. And Private Tom Garcia, who nodded at her but said nothing. The rain created a wall of sound. Thunder rolled like distant artillery. Lightning flashed, illuminating the compound in bursts of white light that made everything look unreal, like photographs of a world that existed only in that frozen moment. Ben pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offered them around. Jack took one. Tom took one. After a moment's hesitation, Ben offered the pack to Keiko. She took one. Had not smoked in weeks, not since before capture. But right now, standing in the rain with 3 American soldiers, it felt like the right thing to do. Ben lit all 4 cigarettes with a battered Zippo. They smoked watching the rain, nobody speaking at first because sometimes silence is its own kind of conversation. Finally, Ben spoke. Well, this is something. Never thought I would be smoking with the enemy. Keiko looked at him. Her English was improving daily. I was clerk. File papers. Never shoot anyone. Jack laughed. Not cruel, just surprised. I worked drugstore soda fountain. Never shot anyone either until last year. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Jack had killed people, had been forced to become a killer. Just like all of them had been forced to become things they never wanted to be. Tom spoke quietly, his voice barely audible over the rain. My brother loved rain, said it reminded him of Texas. Keiko looked at him. The pain in his voice was obvious even through the language barrier. Your brother, she said carefully. Is he gone? Tom nodded. Iwo Jima, 2 months ago. Keiko felt her throat tighten. I am sorry. War is a terrible thing. My brother also soldier in Okinawa. I do not know if he alive. They looked at each other. 2 people who had lost brothers to the same war, who might have in another life, another world been friends, who might have shared cigarettes and complained about rain and talked about home without this weight of grief and distance and everything the war had done to them. Ben spoke again, his voice thoughtful. My dad always said wars are fought by old men who send young men to die for things that do not matter. Never understood what he meant until I got here. Jack nodded. My grandpa fought in the Great War. Said the worst part was not the fighting, was realizing the Germans were just like us. Just boys who wanted to go home. Said that knowledge made killing them harder. Made surviving them harder too. Keiko listened. These were enemy soldiers, the monsters from propaganda. But they were talking about killing as a burden, about survival as something complicated, about the enemy as human. Everything she had been taught was wrong. And the proof was standing right here, smoking cigarettes, sharing grief, acknowledging that the categories the world had given them did not fit the reality of what they were experiencing. The rain continued. Lightning flashed closer. Thunder cracked loud enough to make them all flinch, old instincts from combat zones where loud noises meant danger. Tom offered his cigarette to Keiko. She took it, took a drag, passed it back. Universal soldier gesture. Sharing in scarcity, acknowledging shared humanity. In another life, Ben said quietly, maybe we could have been friends. Keiko felt tears mixed with rain on her face. In another life, she said slowly, we are not soldiers, just people who share cigarette and rain. Ben smiled, maybe in this life. If we choose, one, the suggestion hung there, radical, dangerous, the possibility that they could choose friendship even now, even here, even as enemies. That the war did not have to define everything. That humanity could exist in the spaces between the fighting. Jack looked at Keiko, extended his hand. Western style. I would like that. They shook hands. The first Japanese-American handshake of friendship. Small, fragile, but real. The cigarette burned down. The rain began to ease. Eventually, the soldiers left, heading back to their duties. Keiko remained for a moment longer, watching water drip from the eaves, feeling something shift inside her that she could not name yet. The wall between enemy and human was crumbling, one cigarette at a time. That evening, a car pulled up at the main gate. Official, military, but different somehow. A woman emerged. Colonel Patricia Henderson, 45 years old. Women's Army Corps, her uniform crisp despite the humidity. She was from the Pentagon, from the Women's Reintegration Program. Her mission was to document the experiences of female military personnel on all sides of the conflict. Captain Brennan walked to meet her. They spoke briefly. Then Henderson approached the compound where the 24 women waited, uncertain what this official visit meant. "I am Colonel Patricia Henderson," she said through the translator. "I am here from Washington. I need to speak with all of you about your experiences, about what happened here at Camp Hearn." The women tensed. Was this it? The punishment they had been expecting? The revelation that all the kindness had been a trick? Henderson continued, her voice firm but not unkind. "Your testimony matters. We are documenting how America treats prisoners of war, not for propaganda, for history, for truth. Because what happened here, what Captain Brennan and his men did, what you experienced, this is important. This is what America should be, and the world needs to know." She interviewed Keiko first, sat across from her in a small room, 2 chairs, a table, a pitcher of water and 2 glasses. Through the window, the Texas sun blazed. "Miss Nakamura Henderson began, you led the morning prayers when you arrived. You were their spiritual leader. Tell me what you expected." Keiko took a breath. The memory was still fresh, still raw. "I expect bullet. I pray for quick death. Instead, bacon, eggs, milk. I think this is trick. Make us trust, then torture. But no torture come. Only more food, more kindness. How did that change you?" Keiko's answer came slowly, carefully. "It breaks something inside me. The wall of certainty. I was taught Americans are demons. Emperor teachings, absolute truth. But if Americans are not demons, then what else is lie? Maybe emperor is not God. Maybe honor is not death. Maybe life has meaning. What will you tell your family when you return?" Keiko met Henderson's eyes. "I will tell them truth, even if it costs me everything. Because Sergeant Coleman teach me something. He hate us. He try, hurt us. But he stop himself. If American soldier can choose compassion over hate, I can choose truth over lie." Henderson wrote this down, every word. This testimony would go into official records, would become part of history, would survive long after all of them were gone. That evening, Captain Brennan called an assembly. All 24 women gathered in the compound's central area. American soldiers stood at the perimeter. The sun was setting, turning the Texas sky orange and purple and red colors so vivid they looked painted. Brennan stood on a small platform. His face was serious. He spoke clearly. The translator conveyed his words. "Ladies, I have an announcement. Germany has surrendered. The war with Japan continues, but intelligence suggests it cannot last much longer. Within 2 weeks, you will be processed for repatriation. You are going home." The words should have brought joy. Instead, they brought silence. Complex, heavy. Commander Hannah spoke first. "Home to what defeats shame. How do we face our families?" Akari's voice was quiet. "I learned to respect Americans. Does that make me traitor?" Yuki, the youngest, said what they were all thinking. "I do not want to leave. Is that wrong?" Keiko stood, not because she was the highest rank, not because she had been appointed leader, but because someone had to speak the truth that was burning in all their hearts. "I do not want leave either," she said. "But we must, not because America forced us, because Japan needs to hear truth. We are witnesses. We saw enemy become human. If we stay here, truth stays here. If we go home, truth goes with us." Brennan listened to the translation. Then he spoke, and his words would echo in Keiko's memory for the rest of her long life. "Going home is always complicated, especially after war. You will face difficult questions. People will judge you. But you survived. That is what matters. You survived, and you learned something. Take that lesson back with you. Share it. Maybe someday it will matter." He looked at each face. Japanese and American, young and old, enemy and friend, and everything in between. "You taught us something too. You taught us that the enemy is only enemy until you break bread with them. That hatred is learned and can be unlearned. That our values mean nothing if we only apply them to people who look like us or think like us or fight on our side. So thank you for surviving, for giving us the chance to prove ourselves, for showing us that peace is possible even after war. Commander Hana stood, bowed deeply, the Japanese bow of deepest respect. Around her, all 24 women stood and bowed together. When they straightened, Hana spoke in English, halting but clear. Thank you for treating us like human, for showing us America is not monster from propaganda. We will remember. Always. Brennan nodded. The moment hung suspended. Then he dismissed them. But the weight of what had been said, what had been acknowledged, remained. Brennan insisted on one final gathering before they left. One last meal, a proper goodbye. He assigned Tom to prepare the food. The best food you have got, he said, the kind of meal you serve to honored guests. Tom worked all day. Brisket that had been smoking since dawn, 16 hours over mesquite, ribs with his father's dry rub recipe, pinto beans ranch style, coleslaw, cornbread, everything prepared with love, with care. This was not prison food. This was family food. His father arrived from Fort Worth that afternoon, driving 3 hours to deliver 3 pecan pies his mother had baked that morning, still warm, the crust golden and perfect. He also brought a large container of mole sauce and tamales, wrapped carefully in corn husks. Your mother says if you are feeding people goodbye, feed them your way, his father said. Mix Texas and Mexico. Show them what America really is. All of us together. They embraced, brief, tight. 2 men trying to hold on to something in a world that kept taking everything away. Your brother would be proud, his father said. You are choosing to be better. That takes strength. Miguel would understand. As sunset approached, tables were set up in the compound yard. Lights were strung overhead. Someone produced a record player. Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, Western swing music, the fiddle and steel guitar filling the air with sound that was distinctly, unmistakably Texan. The Japanese women emerged from their barracks wearing clean uniforms that had been provided for their journey home. They looked healthier than 2 weeks ago, stronger, but also uncertain. This gathering felt significant, final. The end of something they had not expected to feel sad about losing. The American soldiers arrived. The smell was overwhelming, smoke and fat and sweetness and tang. A symphony of Texas barbecue. Brennan stood at the head of the main table. He surveyed the gathering. Japanese women and American soldiers, former enemies about to share a meal and about to say goodbye. He raised his hand. The conversations quieted. The music lowered. Everyone turned to face him. Ladies, he began, in 2 days, you board a ship bound for Manila, then Japan. You return to a homeland that has been defeated, that has surrendered. You will face difficult questions. People will judge you for surviving, for being captured, for learning to see Americans as human. He paused. Let the weight settle. I want you to understand something. What happened here was not charity, not even kindness, really. It was us being who we are supposed to be. Americans treat prisoners according to rules because that is who we are, not because you earned it, because we value human dignity. You deserve this treatment because you are human beings, not because you stopped being Japanese, not because you became American, because you are human, and humanity transcends nationality. His voice grew stronger. When people tell you Americans are monsters, remember the breakfast we brought you. Remember Captain Hayes treating your sick. Remember Private Garcia teaching you English over barbecue. Remember that we saw you not as enemies, but as people. And I want you to know you taught us something too. You taught us that the enemy is only enemy until you break bread with them. That hatred is learned and can be unlearned. That our values mean nothing if we only apply them to people who look like us. So thank you for surviving, for giving us the chance to prove ourselves, for showing us that peace is possible even after war. The silence that followed was profound, sacred. Then Commander Hana stood, bowed deeply. All 24 women stood and bowed together. When they straightened, Hana spoke. Thank you for treating us like human, for showing us America is not monster from propaganda. We will remember. Always. The music started again. The spell broke. Soldiers and prisoners moved toward the food. Tom served the brisket himself, sliced it thin, placed it on plates with beans and coleslaw and cornbread. He brought the first plate to Keiko personally. "Mama sent this special for you," he said, indicating a small bowl of mole sauce. "Said you remind her of herself, far from home trying to find family." Keiko tasted the mole. Complex, rich, loving. Tears streamed down her face. Tables became mixed. Japanese women and American soldiers eating together. Someone taught the two-step dance. Keiko danced first with Tom. Awkward, laughing, stumbling, but joyful. Other women joined in, the compound filled with laughter. Real laughter. During dessert, Tom and Keiko stepped away from the crowd, stood at the fence looking at the Texas night sky. "You changed me," Tom said. "Made me see that hating people I have never met is cowardly. Real courage is choosing to know them." Keiko smiled through tears. "You changed me too. Showed me that home is not place, is choice. I choose to make Fort Worth my home someday. If you let me." Tom looked at her. "You are always welcome. Family does not need permission." They shook hands. Then Keiko initiated a hug Western style. Tom returned it no longer stiff, no longer afraid of this connection. Coleman found Yuki near the dessert table. He held something wrapped in paper, a small wooden cross hand carved in a faded photograph. "I made this," he said through the translator. "The cross to remind you that even broken people can choose to heal. The photograph is my platoon. Guadalcanal. 43 men, all gone now, except me." Yuki took both items carefully, the cross smooth in her palm, the photograph showing young men smiling at a camera, unaware of what was coming. She studied each face, so many, so young. "I keep both," she said. "I remember both. Your brothers in arms and your choice to honor them by choosing mercy. I tell my children someday. If I have children." Coleman's voice was rough. "Tell them it is never too late to choose better. Tell them Danny from Birmingham wanted to be a teacher. Tell them he was 19. Tell them they all mattered." Yuki nodded, clutching the cross and photograph to her chest. "I promise. I remember all of them." The party continued into the night. Stories were shared, addresses exchanged, promises made to write, though everyone knew most would never be kept. The world was too broken, the distance too vast. But in that moment, the promises felt real. And that was enough. 2 days later, the buses came. Early morning, the women gathered with small bags, everything they owned. Soldiers lined up to say goodbye. No formal ceremony, just humans acknowledging humans. Handshakes, bows, a few embraces, words inadequate for what they had shared. Keiko was last aboard the bus. She stood at the door, turned back, looked at Camp Hearn, the barbed wire fence, the buildings where she had expected to die, the Americans who had given her life instead. She raised her hand in a military salute, perfect form, then placed her hand over her heart, American civilian gesture, combining both cultures in a single movement. Captain Brennan saluted back. All the soldiers saluted. The moment froze. Then Keiko boarded. The door closed. The engine started. 24 Japanese women left Texas carrying a story no one would quite believe. But it was true. All of it. The war ended 3 months later. August 1945. Japan surrendered. The women returned to a defeated nation. Keiko faced ostracism in Hokkaido, was called traitor. But she endured, worked her father's farm, saved money, waited for the world to change. And in 1952, 7 years after leaving Texas, she returned. She stepped off a bus in Fort Worth, found Garcia Barbecue, pushed open the door. The smell hit her. Brisket, mesquite smoke, exactly as she remembered. Tom looked up. For a moment did not recognize her. Then his eyes widened. He dropped the dish he was holding, vaulted the counter, ran to her, lifted her in a hug spinning. "You came back. You actually came back." Tom's mother emerged from the kitchen, saw Keiko, immediately knew who she was. Mija, embraced her. "You are family now, forever." Keiko worked at the restaurant while studying, became a partner in 1955. By 1960, they had added a Japanese-American fusion menu. Garcia Barbecue became famous across Texas for its unique blend. Two cuisines that had been enemies creating something entirely new. In 1970, they returned to Camp Hearn for the dedication of a historical marker. Keiko Commander Hannah Captain Brennan. The marker read Camp Hearn, POW Camp, 1943 to 1945. Where enemies became human. Keiko spoke to a crowd of 200, told her story, explained how breakfast had changed everything. Today I am American citizen, she said. I run restaurant in Fort Worth. This is legacy of Camp Hearn. Walls break down one meal at a time. Over the decades, Akari's Tokyo Trauma Clinic became renowned for treating veterans from both sides. Commander Hana worked with cultural exchange programs bridging Japan and America. Yuki became a history teacher, keeping the photograph of Coleman's platoon in her classroom, telling her students that remembering the enemy's humanity was the only way to prevent future wars. The years passed. Keiko lived to 96, worked at Garcia Barbecue until 2015, died peacefully in 2016 surrounded by family, both American and Japanese, both her birth family and her chosen family. The family she had found in a Texas prisoner camp over breakfast and barbecue and the slow, difficult work of choosing compassion over hate. In 2024, a Japanese-American family walked into Garcia Barbecue, fourth generation now. James Garcia III, 28 years old, stood behind the counter surrounded by photographs on the wall. 1945, 1952, 1970, 2015. The entire history visible. The grandmother, 60 years old, approached. My grandmother was Keiko Nakamura. James's eyes widened. Mrs. Nakamura was my great-grandfather's partner. She was family, the heart of this restaurant. The grandmother pulled out an envelope. Inside a photograph, 90-year-old Keiko in a garden, wearing Tom's old Garcia barbecue apron. The garden had both Japanese plants and Texas plants, cherry blossoms and bluebonnets, bamboo and mesquite. In the background, an American flag and a Japanese flag flying together. On the back, written in English and Japanese. To the Garcia family. Thank you for teaching me that enemies can become friends, that hate can become love, that breakfast can change the world. I grew this garden because you taught me to plant hope instead of anger. May it bloom forever. Keiko Nakamura Garcia. She took Garcia as her middle name in 1960. James and his father both cried. They hung the photograph in the center of the wall, placed a plaque underneath. Keiko Nakamura Garcia, 1920 to 2016. Co-founder Garcia Barbecue. She taught us one breakfast at a time we changed the world. The restaurant filled with the evening crowd, people of all backgrounds eating Keiko's recipes. The most popular item on the menu, Keiko's signature brisket with miso glaze. The description read, created by Keiko Nakamura Garcia in 1955, combining Texas smoke with Japanese umami. The flavor of two cultures becoming one. And if you listen closely, if you paid attention, you could almost hear Keiko's voice. Not from memory, not from recording, but from something deeper. The voice that speaks when truth is told and preserved and passed down through generations. They say enemies are made, not born. I believe this is true. I was taught to hate Americans. They were taught to hate Japanese. But hatred is exhausting. And breakfast is delicious. I came to Texas expecting bullet. I received bacon. I returned to Texas choosing family. I received home. Some say I betrayed Japan by loving America. Some say I betrayed America by staying Japanese. I say I betrayed no one. I chose both. Because that is the secret they don't teach in war. You can love two countries. You can be two things. And in that choosing, you become something new. Not Japanese, not American. Human. The garden in the photograph bloomed eternal. Both flags flew. The smoke rose from the smoker, and the lesson of Camp Hearn lived on. Because this is what it means to be human. Not the fighting, not the victory, but the moment when you look at your enemy and choose to see a person. The moment when you break bread with someone you were taught to hate. The moment when you realize that breakfast can change the world. That is the breakfast that broke the war. That is how we win. One meal, one garden, one choice at a time, forever.